Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Niehaus and I'm coming to you today from Brisbane, Australia. The time doesn't really work out for me to stick around for questions after, but I would love to hear from you. So give me a shout on Twitter at amandacniehaus.com or on email at amandacniehaus@gmail.com. I trained as a scientist, and for many years I studied the behavior and physiology of migrating birds, climate change affected frogs, and semelparous marsupials. But for much of that, I had a secret life. I loved the writing part of science, the ideas and the story, and my brain always seemed to want to take what I was doing or reading and extrapolate, use it as metaphor or an image or a character. Maybe you love writing or reading, or you feel like you have something to say beyond all those science and nature papers you're working toward. What I want to say first up is yes, do those things. We know from studies by psychologists like Keith Oatley and Melanie Green that people remember the facts they read in fiction just as well as they remember those from nonfiction. And fiction can act as a kind of simulation of the real world that teaches us how to inhabit other bodies. When we read, our minds simulate the world of the story, the lives of the characters, and that process makes us more empathetic to experiences outside our own. The world really needs some empathy right now, a view into different lives, including our scientific lives. So, how do you get started? First, what is the story you want to tell? I have found that writing a novel is a bit like doing a PhD, in the sense that you need to be pretty committed at the start to see it through. You need to be invested in this idea. You want to build on something that just won't leave you alone. A character whose voice you start to hear over your kids' voices, or a historical person or event or paper that you read that makes you wonder, what if? Creative writing is really about that what if of our lives, where we get to play with reality. Many novelists start their work by building a world. If you're writing something like historical fiction or sci-fi, this may be where you start too, setting up the time and place, the physical and social laws of it. I tend to write contemporary literary fiction, though it's always informed by science, and I usually start with a theme or an idea, a sort of curiosity that I build characters and plot around. In writing Breeding Season, it was the question, how do the kinds of trade-offs between sex and death that I see in nature manifest in contemporary human lives? This gave me a general framework for the story, one in which, as we all know, time is limited, and what we give to our family and what we give to our career are often at great odds. I also had the very real experience of having breast cancer just after my daughter was born, 13 years ago now. Everything's good. But reproduction and mortality have always been very strongly linked in my mind. It's one of the things that drove me to studying these animals in the first place. These semelparous marsupials that invest so much into reproduction that they die soon after. On a whole other level, I think we often forget that the science that we study is really incredibly interesting and a whole different world for most people. So what do you work on? What are the fundamental questions or theories that you are aiming to tackle? And how could you translate these ideas thematically into the lives of humans? So this is the great thing about fiction, right? You can take the seed of a character idea and keep building until everything seems to conspire against these characters. Where they come from, how they see the world, the work they do, their family histories. We really want to set everything against where they're trying to go. This is really important because stories are fundamentally driven by conflict. Can you think of the last book or movie or TV show you watched where nothing happened? Where the main character went about a normal day with no confrontation or difficulty and nothing changed? Even our research papers are based on conflict, though it's usually more subtle. Your field has progressed to just this point. What is the gap that you're trying to address now? How do you aim to fill it? And did you succeed? So one of the important things about fiction is to make it difficult for our characters to succeed. Give your characters a challenge that forces them to change or to resist changing. I love writing scientists as characters because it's a perspective that isn't common in novels and, to be honest, often isn't done well. Begin to notice how you notice things. How has being a scientist, your special kind of scientist, changed the way you see the world? We forget that not everyone knows what we know or experiences the world the way that we do. So think about your unique perspective as a scientist and as a person. A parent, a child, a neighbor, a partner, a citizen. Begin to notice how your research or teaching interacts with these other aspects of who you are and influences the way you look at the world, plants or animals, or your relationships. Here's something I didn't realize until I started writing. Most fiction actually begins with the author's own life. Almost all novels are tinged with autobiography. So the easiest way to get started is to create a character that's kind of like you, who does the kind of work that you do, because trust me, readers want to be part of that world. I hear this all the time. They want to see behind those closed doors. The breeding season's main character, Elise, is a version of me. Like humans and chimpanzees, we share a significant proportion of our DNA. We both have done field work on semelparous marsupials. We're both interested in that trade-off between sex and death. But that last 1.2% that differs between us, like chimpanzees and humans, that's the fiction. That's what you see on the page. So how do you find out what's different? Start with a version of yourself and imagine a problem in that person's life. Something big, maybe, something that threatens to uproot everything. A sick child or a dying parent or a hurricane, climate change, being in love with the wrong person, missing out on a job. What do you imagine you'd do in that situation? How does your character, that kind of you person, see the problem differently because of their research, their history, their family or friends? In my book, I was interested in the links between sex and death. It's what I was studying in my postdoc, and I wanted to explore it from other angles. So how does a scientist who's studying semelparous marsupials deal with the loss of a child? How does she see her own body, knowing so much about animal bodies? How does she see the forest in early morning fieldwork? How does she deal with mating conflict or reproductive trade-offs in her own life and marriage? You can see where I'm going. You start with you. Carry a notebook and write in it little bits every day if you can. How did you get where you are? What are the experiences that have defined your career? The field work, the lab experiments, the papers, the meetings, the people. What are the sensations of your work? The slimy feel of a tadpole in your hand, or the winter birds calling, or the jump in your heart when a giant cockroach emerges from behind the staff fridge. The sounds, sights, feelings, smells, tastes of your work. What are the words you use, the equipment? What do you put on your office walls? Like in science, writing work often begins in observation, thinking, experimenting with your words on the page. And whatever you find there, keep going. Thank you for having me.